The station floated in the dark like a ring of pale bone, spinning slowly around a star that had died a long time ago. They called it the Pale Ring. It was neutral ground, a place where species met to talk instead of fight. At least, that was the idea. Captain Han Doyen stood at the bridge window of the Jindo and watched the station grow larger as they drifted closer. The Jindo was a small ship. It carried no heavy weapons. It had no thick armor plating. It was built for talking, not for war. 40 crew members, 1 diplomatic team, 1 mission. "Docking in 4 minutes, Captain," said Shin Bora from the communications console. She was young, sharp-eyed, and had a habit of tapping her fingers on the edge of her panel when she was nervous. She was tapping now. "Relax," Doyen said without turning around. "We are just here to talk." "Yes, sir," Bora said. She did not stop tapping. Behind them, in the narrow corridor that led to the main cabin, Yoon Hana was reviewing her datapad for the 100th time. She was the lead negotiator for the Terran United Council, and she had spent 3 months preparing for this meeting. Every word on the datapad had been chosen with care. Every clause had been discussed, argued over, and approved by the Council back on Earth. The terms were simple. Fair borders, a promise not to attack each other, trade between the two sides. Nothing unreasonable, nothing greedy. Hana was not a tall woman. She was not loud. She did not fill a room when she walked in. But the people who knew her well knew something important about her. She never blinked first. The Jindo docked with a soft thud. The airlock hissed and opened, and the smell of the pale ring drifted in. It was cold and metallic, like breathing inside a machine. Doyun nodded to Hana. She tucked the datapad under her arm, straightened her jacket, and walked through the airlock with Bora and 2 aides following close behind. The station's main corridor was wide and curved, built for species much larger than humans. The ceiling was high enough that Hana's footsteps echoed. Lights along the walls glowed a dull blue. Other species moved through the corridor in small groups. Some looked at the human delegation with curiosity. Others looked away quickly, as if they did not want to be seen watching. Everyone on the station already knew why the humans were here. The Dreth Dominion had been expanding for years, swallowing smaller species one by one. 3 civilizations had been absorbed in the last decade alone. Now the Dreth border was pushing against human-claimed space, directly threatening the Hanem colony, a world of 1.2 million human settlers, farmers, engineers, teachers, children. Regular people living regular lives on a planet they had built from nothing. Hana was here to make sure those people stayed safe. The negotiation chamber was at the heart of the station. It was a large, round room with a single long table in the center and seats on both sides. The walls were transparent, showing the black void outside and the ships docked around the station. Hana noticed the Dreth ships immediately. There were 60 of them. Warships. Heavy cruisers with gun ports visible even from this distance. They hung in the dark, like a pack of predators waiting for a signal. It was not subtle. It was not meant to be. The Dreth wanted everyone to see their strength before a single word was spoken. Hana looked at the ships for a moment, then sat down at the table and placed her datapad in front of her. They waited. The Dreth arrived 20 minutes late. The doors on the far side of the chamber slid open, and the sound hit first. Armor clinking. Deep voices speaking in a language that sounded like rocks grinding together. Grand Ruler Votan entered the room, and the room seemed to shrink. He was enormous, nearly 3 meters tall, with dark green scaled skin and eyes that burned a dull orange. He wore ceremonial armor that looked like it had been made from the bones of something large and unlucky. Behind him came a line of Dreth soldiers, each one armed and armored, filling the opposite side of the chamber until there was barely room to move. And beside Votan, walking with the easy confidence of someone who had ended wars personally, was Warlord Cressa. She was almost as tall as Votan, leaner, with scars across her jaw, and arms that she wore like medals. Her eyes moved over the human delegation the way a predator looks at something small and slow. Hana stood. She bowed her head slightly, a gesture of respect that cost her nothing and meant everything in diplomacy. "Grand Ruler Votan," she said, "thank you for agreeing to this meeting. The Terran United Council hopes this is the beginning of a lasting and peaceful relationship between our peoples." Votan did not sit. He looked down at Hana the way someone might look at an insect that had crawled onto their table. His officers shifted behind him, and a few of them made low sounds that might have been laughter. "You may present your terms," Votan said. His voice was deep enough to vibrate in Hana's chest. Hana slid the datapad across the table. "These are our proposals: mutual recognition of current borders, a formal non-aggression agreement, and provisions for trade between our territories. We believe these terms are fair and beneficial to both sides." Votan picked up the datapad between two massive clawed fingers. He glanced at it for less than 3 seconds. Then he placed it back on the table and slid it toward Hana, as if returning something dirty. "The Dreth Dominion does not negotiate with lesser fauna," he said. The room erupted. The Dreth soldiers laughed. Cressa smiled wide, showing rows of sharp teeth. Even Votan's aides standing in the back allowed themselves a look of amusement. The sound bounced off the transparent walls and filled the chamber like a wave. Hana did not move. She did not flinch. She did not look away. She stood exactly where she was, her hands at her sides, her face perfectly still, and she waited for the laughter to stop. It took a while. When the room was quiet again, Hana spoke. Her voice was calm and clear, and it carried to every corner of the chamber without effort. "Is that your final position?" Votan tilted his head, as if surprised she was still speaking. "It is." Hana nodded once. She picked up the datapad, tucked it under her arm, and turned to Bora. "Open a channel to Earth," she said. "Priority 1. Then she walked out of the chamber without looking back. Bora followed. The two aides followed. Their footsteps echoed down the corridor, steady and unhurried, growing fainter, until the only sound left was the hum of the station and the distant rumble of Dreth warships holding position outside. In the chamber, Votan watched the empty doorway for a moment. Then he turned to Cressa and said, "Prepare the invasion timeline. They will not be a problem." Cressa grinned. They were barely worth the trip. Somewhere in the back of the room, Envoy Dulles, a low-ranking Dreth diplomat who had been assigned to observe the meeting, stared at the door the humans had walked through. He had watched Hana's face carefully during the entire exchange. He had seen the laughter hit her like a wave, and he had seen something that troubled him deeply. She had not been afraid, and that, Dulles thought, was a very dangerous sign. Under Galactic Diplomatic Protocol, any species requesting formal negotiation was entitled to 3 sessions before talks could be officially declared failed. Hana knew this rule. She had studied it carefully, and she intended to use every single session she was owed. The second session was held the following day. Hana arrived at the negotiation chamber exactly on time. She wore the same plain dark jacket. She carried the same datapad. She sat in the same chair and waited with her hands folded on the table. Bora sat beside her, quiet and watchful, recording everything. The Dreth arrived late again, 40 minutes this time. When Votan finally entered, he brought even more soldiers than before. They lined the walls like statues carved from green stone, their weapons visible, their eyes fixed on the small human delegation across the table. Hana stood and bowed her head again. Grand Ruler, thank you for returning. We have revised our proposals based on yesterday's discussion. We have widened the neutral zone between our borders by an additional 12 light-years as a gesture of good faith. We have also added a cultural exchange clause that we believe— You are still talking, Cressa interrupted from Votan's side. She leaned forward, resting her armored forearms on the table. The metal made a heavy sound against the surface. Do you not understand what happened yesterday? Your terms were rejected. You were dismissed. Why are you still here? Because the protocol allows 3 sessions, Hana said simply, and I intend to use all 3. Cressa looked at Votan. Votan waved a clawed hand lazily, as if swatting at something small. Let her speak. It changes nothing. Hana presented the revised terms. She explained each clause clearly and patiently, as if she were speaking to reasonable people who might actually listen. She mentioned the Hainam colony and the families living there. She spoke about the cost of war compared to the cost of peace. The Dreth did not listen. Cressa whispered something to one of the officers behind her, and the officer laughed quietly. Votan examined his own claws. A soldier near the door yawned, showing a mouth full of teeth. When Hana finished, Votan said, No. That was all, just no. Hana nodded. I understand. We will return for the 3rd session tomorrow. She stood, collected her datapad, and left. That evening, aboard the Jindo, Bora came to Captain Doyen's quarters with something on her screen. Her face was tight with anger, the kind she was trying hard to keep under control. Captain, you need to see this. She played the broadcast. It was on an open channel, unencrypted, sent out to every system within range. The Dreth had recorded the negotiations and edited them into a propaganda piece. The footage showed Hana bowing, speaking softly, presenting her proposals with careful respect. But the Dreth had added commentary over the top. A narrator calls humanity the latest prey species to beg for mercy. The recording showed Cressa's soldiers laughing, and the narrator described it as the natural response of the strong to the whimpering of the weak. The broadcast ended with a message: Let all species witness how the Dreth Dominion receives the surrender of lesser creatures. Bora's jaw was tight. They sent this everywhere, Captain. Every relay, every station, every open frequency, half the galaxy has seen it by now. Doyen watched the broadcast once, from beginning to end. His face showed nothing. When it was over, he sat quietly for a moment, then said, Send it to Earth, unedited, full context. Make sure Admiral Kwan sees it personally. Yes, sir. Captain, permission to speak freely? Go ahead. They are making us look like fools. Doyen looked at her. There was something in his eyes that was hard to read. It was not anger exactly. It was something quieter and much more dangerous. No, Bora, he said. They are making themselves look like fools. They just do not know it yet. The 3rd session came the next morning. The final session. This time, the Dreth treated it like entertainment. Cressa had invited additional officers to watch. They sat along the walls in casual poses, some of them eating, others talking among themselves, as if the negotiation was background noise at a party. Votan sat at the table with the lazy confidence of someone who had already won. Hana walked in and sat down. She looked at the crowded room. She looked at the officers eating and laughing along the walls. She looked at Cressa's wide, sharp-toothed grin. Then she opened her datapad and began. Grand Ruler, this is our 3rd and final session under Galactic Diplomatic Protocol. I am presenting our original terms one last time, unchanged, because we believe they were fair from the beginning. Votan did not even pretend to consider them. He pushed the datapad away without touching the screen and delivered his ultimatum. Humanity will surrender the Hainam colony. You will pull your border back by 40 light-years. You will pay tribute to the Dominion in raw materials, fuel, and labor. You will do this within one galactic cycle, which I am told is approximately 72 of your Earth hours. He paused, letting the words settle like heavy stones. If you refuse, we will take everything by force, and we will not be gentle. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Cressa added, "You should be grateful we are giving you the choice at all. The last 3 species we absorbed did not even get that." The Dreth officers murmured in agreement. Some of them nodded. Some smiled. Hana sat still for a long time. She looked at Votan. She looked at Cressa. She looked at the soldiers along the walls. Then she pressed a button on her datapad and spoke clearly, her voice carrying to every recording device in the room. "I want to make something clear, for the record and for every species listening. The Terran United Council sent me here to find peace. We offered fair terms. We revised those terms to be even more generous. We came to this table 3 times, as the protocol requires, and 3 times our offer of peace was refused." She paused. "I want every civilization in this galaxy to understand what happened here. We asked for peace. We were answered with laughter." Votan leaned forward, amused. "Record whatever you like, little negotiator. No one is coming to save you. No one in this galaxy would dare stand against the Dominion for the sake of humans." Hana looked at him for a long, still moment. Then she said, "You are right about one thing. No one is coming to save us." She closed her datapad. "We do not need saving." She stood and walked out. Votan watched her go with the same lazy amusement he had shown from the beginning. He turned to Cressa. "Begin the clock. 72 hours." Aboard the Jindo, Doyen was waiting at the airlock when Hana came through. He searched her face for a moment. "How did it go?" Hana looked at him. There was no anger in her expression, no fear, no sadness, just the calm, steady look of someone who had done exactly what she was supposed to do. "Exactly the way Admiral Kwan said it would," she said. Doyen allowed himself a thin, cold smile. He turned to the bridge and said, "Bora, open a quantum-encrypted channel to the Terran 7th Fleet. Tell Admiral Kwan that the protocol is complete. All 3 sessions are documented and filed." Bora's fingers moved fast across her console. The channel opened. The message went out, encrypted in a way that no Dreth sensor could detect or decode, traveling faster than light across the dark spaces between stars. In the negotiation chamber, as the Dreth celebrated what they believed was the humiliation of another weak species, Envoy Dulles sat alone in the corner. He had watched all 3 sessions. He had studied the humans carefully. And something about the 3rd session had shaken him in a way he could not explain. It was the way Hana had spoken at the end. She had not begged. She had not threatened. She had simply made sure the record was clear. As if the negotiation was never meant to change Votan's mind. As if it was meant to be evidence. Evidence for what? Dulles did not know, but he had a terrible feeling he was about to find out. The broadcast spread across the galaxy, like a fire no one could put out. Every relay station carried it. Every open channel repeated it. The unedited recordings of all 3 negotiation sessions, combined with the Dreth propaganda version, reached hundreds of star systems within hours. Species that had never heard of Earth watched a small human woman bow politely and present fair terms to a ruler 3 times her size. They watched her do it again and again. They watched the Dreth laugh each time. They watched the soldiers mock her. They watched Votan slide the datapad away like it was garbage. And then they watched Hana's final words, spoken with a calm that made the laughter around her sound hollow and ugly. The reactions were mixed. Some species shook their heads and looked away. They had seen this story before. A small civilization tries to reason with the Dreth. The Dreth crush them, and the galaxy moves on. It was sad, but it was how things worked. The strong consumed the weak. That was the oldest law in the universe. Other species, the ones who had already been conquered or forced into submission, watched with a different kind of attention. They saw something in the human negotiator's face that they recognized. It was not weakness, it was patience. And patience, in their experience, was either the mark of someone who had already given up, or someone who was waiting for the right moment. A few old civilizations, the ones who had survived long enough to learn caution, quietly began pulling their ships away from the border region. They did not explain why. They simply moved. On Earth, inside a building with no windows and no name, the Terran United Council war room was fully active. Officers moved between screens and holographic star maps. Data streams flowed across every surface, but there was no panic, no shouting, no scrambling. The room moved with the steady rhythm of a machine that had been prepared for this moment long before it arrived. Admiral Quan Tejo stood at the center of the room, his hands clasped behind his back, staring at the star map projected in front of him. He was a man of average height, average build, with short gray hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from the same stone. He kept his emotions locked inside. He did not raise his voice. He did not gesture dramatically. He simply stood and studied the map as if it were a puzzle he had already solved and was now just confirming. Because he had. 3 years ago, when the Dreth first began expanding toward human space, the Terran Council had asked Quan to prepare a contingency plan. He had done more than that. He had built an entire fleet around the assumption that diplomacy would fail. Not because he wanted it to fail. He was not a man who enjoyed war, but he was a man who understood that wanting peace and being prepared for war were not opposite things. They were the same thing. The diplomatic mission, the 3 sessions, Hana's careful words, all of it was part of the plan. Not a trick, not a performance. The council genuinely wanted peace, but Quan had told them from the beginning, "Send your negotiator, give them every chance, but let me build something behind her, just in case they laugh." They had laughed. Now Quan turned to his command staff and spoke. "The Dreth fleet is moving toward Hainam Colony. Current count is 60 warships, with reinforcements expected from their inner territory. Estimated strength at time of engagement is 100 to 130 vessels." He paused. "We will meet them in the corridor between the Pale Ring and Hainam, with the full 7th Fleet, 900 warships, full combat readiness." The numbers alone told the story. But numbers were not the whole story. Deep in the Gukto Nebula, hidden inside a cloud of dust and radiation that scrambled every known sensor system, the Terran 7th Fleet waited. 900 ships of various sizes, from fast attack frigates to heavy cruisers, arranged in precise formation groups and linked together by a tactical network that allowed them to fight as a single mind. And at the center of the formation, like a mountain surrounded by hills, sat the Black Tortoise. The Black Tortoise was not just a ship, it was a statement. 3 kilometers long from bow to stern, armored with layered composite plating that could withstand direct hits from anything in the known galaxy. It carried enough conventional weapons to fight a small war on its own. But conventional weapons were not why the Black Tortoise existed. Deep inside the ship, in a chamber that required 3 separate security clearances to enter, Park Jinu sat at his console and ran the final calibration sequence on the ship's main weapon, the Graviton Compression Cannon. It did not have an official name that anyone used. The crew simply called it the Hammer. Jinu was a quiet man. He wore glasses, even though corrective surgery could have fixed his eyes years ago. He preferred the glasses. They gave him something to adjust when he was thinking, and he was always thinking. Right now, he was thinking about the tests they had conducted 14 months ago on an uninhabited moon at the edge of human space. The moon had been roughly 400 kilometers in diameter. The hammer had fired once. The graviton beam had compressed the space around the moon, folding it inward, like paper being crumpled into a ball. The moon had collapsed into a point smaller than a grain of sand. The point had burned white-hot for 3 seconds, then evaporated into nothing. The moon no longer existed. Not even dust remained. Jinnu checked his numbers one more time. Everything was green. He closed the calibration file and sat back in his chair. He took off his glasses and cleaned them slowly with the edge of his sleeve, staring at nothing. He hoped they would not have to use it. Meanwhile, at the Pale Ring station, the Jindo was preparing to depart. Doyun had given the order to undock as soon as the 72-hour clock started. There was no reason to stay and every reason to leave. But before the airlock closed, something unexpected happened. A figure appeared in the docking corridor. It was Dreth, but smaller than the soldiers, dressed in simple diplomatic robes instead of armor. He approached the Jindo's airlock with quick, nervous steps, glancing over his shoulder as if afraid of being seen. Bora saw him on the external camera and called Doyen. Doyen told her to let him speak. Dulles stopped at the airlock threshold. He did not step inside. He stood in the corridor, his orange eyes wide, his voice low and hurried. "I am not here officially," he said. "I speak only for myself. I want you to know that not everyone in the Dominion agrees with the Grand Ruler. There are those of us who saw your negotiator and understood what she was offering. There are those of us who wanted to accept." Bora looked at him. She did not feel sympathy exactly, but she did not feel anger either. She felt something sadder than both. "Is there still time?" Dulles asked. "If I could speak to your negotiator, if I could arrange an unofficial channel, perhaps—" "There was time," Bora said. Her voice was not cruel, but it was final. "Your ruler spent it laughing." Dulles stared at her. Then he lowered his head, turned, and walked back down the corridor without another word. The Jindo undocked. The clamps released with a heavy clang that echoed through the hull. Doyun watched the pale ring shrink on the view screen as the ship moved away. Then the stars stretched, the engines hummed, and the Jindo jumped to light speed, leaving the dead star and the station and the 60 Dreth warships behind. On the bridge of the Dreth flagship, Warlord Cressa watched the sensor reading as the human ship vanished from detection. She smiled. "The human vessel has fled," she reported to Votan. Votan nodded, satisfied. "Good. They are running. Begin the invasion of Haenum Colony. Full fleet advance. I want the colony under our flag before the humans have time to even consider fighting back." The Dreth fleet, 60 ships strong, and growing as reinforcements jumped in from the inner dominion, began to move. They formed into a massive attack column and set course for the Haenum corridor. War hymns played on the open channels. Officers toasted each other with strong drink. The mood was celebration, not preparation. In their minds, the war was already won. In the dark of the Gukdo Nebula, surrounded by dust and silence, 900 human warships received the signal they had been waiting for. Across every bridge, every combat station, every ready room, the same message appeared on every screen. Protocol complete. 3 sessions documented. Authorization GeoBuck confirmed. Admiral Quan Tejo stood on the bridge of the Black Tortoise and looked at the message. He let it sit for exactly 5 seconds. Then he spoke, and his voice carried across the entire fleet through the tactical network, calm and steady and cold as deep space. "All ships, form up. Strike Group Alpha. Prepare to engage at maximum burn. Seize the corridor. Advance." 900 engines lit up at once, and the nebula glowed like a sunrise. The Dreth war fleet moved through open space like a storm that had never been stopped. 120 ships now, swollen with reinforcements that had jumped in from the inner dominion, arranged in an attack column that stretched across thousands of kilometers. Heavy cruisers at the front, carriers in the middle, supply ships trailing behind like the tail of a great beast. Warlord Cressa stood at the command platform of her flagship, the Iron Fang, and watched the stars move past. War hymns played over the fleet's open channel, deep rumbling songs about conquest and strength and the crushing of the weak. Her officers sang along under their breath. The mood on every ship was loose and confident. This was not a battle they were heading toward. It was a harvest. Cressa had done this 12 times before. 12 species, 12 surrenders. Some fought, some begged, some tried to run. It did not matter. The Dreth fleet would arrive. The enemy would see the size of the force, and within hours it would be over. The humans, she thought, would fold even faster than most. They had already sent their negotiator to whimper at a table. Their only warship in the area had turned and run. This would be quick. "Time to Hanem Corridor?" she asked. 40 minutes, Warlord, her navigation officer replied. Cressa nodded and allowed herself a slow smile. 40 minutes, and then the Dominion would have a new colony world and a new subject species. Votan would be pleased. She might even get another scar to add to her collection. Then the censor officer spoke. His voice was different. Not alarmed exactly, but uncertain, which was something Cressa had never heard from him before. "Warlord, I am picking up a contact ahead. Single signature." "A scout?" Cressa asked without concern. "Uncertain. It is large." "Define large." Before the officer could answer, the censor board changed. The single contact multiplied. 1 became 10. 10 became 50. 50 became 100. The numbers kept climbing, and the censor officer's hands began to shake over his console. "Warlord," he said, and now there was real fear in his voice. "I am reading over 900 contacts. They just appeared. All at once, directly in our path." The war hymns on the open channel stopped. Across the Dreth fleet, officers stared at their screens and said nothing. The singing died. The laughter died. The confidence that had filled every ship like warm air went cold in an instant. The Terran's 7th Fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation, and the universe changed. 900 human warships spread across the void in a vast crescent shape, an ancient naval formation called envelopment, designed to wrap around an enemy from both sides and leave nowhere to run. Fast attack frigates on the edges, heavy cruisers forming the inner curve, destroyers filling the gaps with overlapping fields of fire. Every ship in exactly the right position, every weapon system already powered and aimed. And at the center of the crescent, sitting like a mountain in a field of wolves, was the Black Tortoise. Cressa stared at the view screen. She had seen large ships before. The Dreth built large ships, but the Black Tortoise was something else entirely. It was 3 kilometers of dark metal and silent threat, so massive that the human warships around it looked like escorts for a god. Its hull was featureless and smooth, no visible gun ports, no exposed systems, nothing that looked like a weakness. It simply sat there in the dark, and its presence said everything that needed to be said. For the first time in her career, Cressa felt her stomach tighten. "Warlord," the communications officer said, "we are being hailed. Audio only." Cressa straightened her back and clenched her jaw. She was a warrior. She had crushed 12 species. She would not show fear in front of her crew. "Put it through." The voice that came through the speakers was human, male, flat and calm and completely unhurried, as if the man speaking had all the time in the universe, and nothing in front of him concerned him even slightly. "This is Admiral Quan Tejo of the Terran 7th Fleet. You are in violation of sovereign human space. You were offered peace 3 times. You refused 3 times. This has been documented and filed under Galactic Diplomatic Protocol. A pause, just long enough to feel heavy. You had 60 seconds to power down your weapons and surrender unconditionally. All vessels will hold position and await boarding. Any ship that attempts to flee or fire will be destroyed. There will not be a second warning. The channel went silent. Around her, the bridge crew looked at her with wide eyes, waiting. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders. 900 ships. That was 15 times the size of the Dreth fleet. The humans had not just prepared for war, they had prepared to end one. But Cressa was Dreth. She had never surrendered. She had never run. And she was not going to start now, not in front of her fleet, not in front of history. All ships, she said, her voice hard and loud. Attack formation. Target the center of their line. We break through, or we die trying. The Dreth fleet surged forward. The first 30 seconds were chaos. Dreth heavy cruisers fired everything they had at the human line. Plasma bolts and kinetic rounds streaked across the void in bright lines of fire. For a moment, it looked like a real battle. Then the human fleet responded, and the word battle stopped being accurate. Human ships did not fight like individual vessels. They fought like a single organism. Every ship was linked through a tactical AI network that processed data in real time, sharing targeting information, adjusting formations, and coordinating fire with a speed and precision that no crew of living beings could match. When a Dreth ship fired at a human frigate, the frigate was already moving before the shot arrived. When a Dreth cruiser tried to flank, 3 human destroyers were already waiting where it would be. The Dreth fleet began to come apart. Ships were isolated, surrounded, and taken apart piece by piece. Their communications were jammed, their sensor systems were blinded by electronic warfare so advanced that some Dreth crews could not even see the ships that were killing them. It was a demonstration. Cressa fought hard. She gave orders with sharp precision, trying to hold her fleet together, trying to find a gap in the human line. But there was no gap. The crescent closed tighter with every minute, and ships that tried to escape the edges were caught by the frigates waiting there. Then the Black Tortoise fired. Not at a ship. At the empty space between the center and rear of the Dreth formation. A column of light erupted from the dreadnought's bow. Not bright like a laser or hot like plasma, but something else. Something that looked like the universe folding in on itself. The graviton compression beam hit the target zone and space bent. 26 Dreth warships caught in the blast radius did not explode. They did not burn. They simply stopped existing. The space around them folded inward like cloth being crumpled in a fist, and the ships, their crews, their armor, their weapons, everything, compressed into a single point smaller than a marble. The point glowed white for 3 seconds, humming with a sound that every ship in the area felt in their hulls. Then it evaporated, and where 26 ships had been, there was nothing. Not debris, not dust, nothing at all. The Dreth fleet broke. There was no order to retreat. There was no organized withdrawal. Ships simply turned and ran in every direction, engines burning at maximum, crews screaming into jammed communication channels. The attack column dissolved like smoke in wind. Cressa's flagship, the Iron Fang, tried to run with them, but a precise shot from a human cruiser disabled her engines. Then another shot took out her weapons. Then another took out her communications. The Iron Fang drifted, dark and crippled, spinning slowly in the void. Human boarding craft approached. Cressa could hear them locking onto the hull. She stood on her silent bridge, surrounded by officers who had stopped looking at her, and stared at the view screen. The Black Tortoise filled it completely. From this close, the ship was not just large, it was a landscape. A continent of dark metal hanging in space, silent and absolute and patient. Cressa thought about the human negotiator, the small woman in the plain jacket who had bowed her head and spoken softly and carried a single datapad. She thought about the laughter in the chamber. She thought about Votan sliding the datapad away. They were not begging, she whispered. No one on the bridge answered her. There was no one left who could. Somewhere far behind the battle, on the edge of the corridor, a single Dreth ship that had escaped the Crescent drifted alone with damaged engines. On its bridge, Envoy Dulles sat in a seat that was not his, among officers who were too stunned to tell him to leave, and stared at the sensor readings, showing the remains of the Dreth warfleet scattered across space like broken teeth. He thought about the human woman at the airlock of the Jindo. He thought about what she had said. Your ruler spent it laughing. Dulles closed his eyes and understood, far too late, what she had meant. The Pale Ring Station was quiet in a way it had never been before. The same blue lights hummed along the curved corridors. The same cold, metallic air circulated through the ventilation systems. The same transparent walls showed the void outside. But the void looked different now. The 60 Dreth warships that had once crowded the station's perimeter were gone. In their place, arranged in calm, orderly rows that stretched to the edge of visibility, were the ships of the Terran 7th Fleet. Hundreds of them, motionless and dark, their running lights blinking slowly like the eyes of something very large and very patient. And behind them all, visible through every window on every level of the station, sat the Black Tortoise. It hung in space like a second moon, so large that the station itself looked small beside it. It did nothing. It moved nothing. It simply existed, and its existence was enough. Brand Ruler Votan had returned to the Pale Ring. He had not wanted to, but with his warfleet destroyed, Warlord Cressa captured, and the human fleet positioned between his remaining territory and everything he had hoped to take, he had no choice. The Terran Council had sent him a single message through official channels. We are prepared to resume negotiations at the Pale Ring. Negotiator Yoon Hana will be waiting. He arrived with a small escort. 4 ships, no warfleet, no armor-clad soldiers lining the walls. Just Votan, a handful of aides, and the heavy silence of a ruler who had run out of options. The negotiation chamber looked the same long table, the same chairs, the same transparent walls. But the view through those walls told a completely different story than it had 5 days ago. Votan sat down and stared at the human fleet outside. A muscle in his jaw twitched. The door on the opposite side opened, and Yoon Hana walked in. She wore the same plain dark jacket. She carried the same datapad. Her hair was pulled back in the same simple style. She looked exactly the way she had looked during the first session, and the second, and the third. As if nothing had changed, as if the battle had not happened, as if 120 warships had not been scattered across space like broken glass. She sat down across from Votan, placed the datapad on the table, and folded her hands. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Votan looked at Hana. He searched her face for triumph, for mockery, for the cruel satisfaction he himself would have shown if the positions were reversed. He found none of it. Her expression was the same as it had always been. Calm, patient, professional. It was worse than mockery. Mockery he could have understood. This steady, quiet composure made him feel something he had never felt at a negotiation table. Small. Hana slid the datapad across the table. These are our terms, she said. Votan looked down at the screen. He read the terms slowly, his orange eyes moving across each line. Then he read them again. Then he looked up at Hana with an expression that, for the first time, was not arrogance, or amusement, or contempt. It was confusion. These are the same terms, he said. Yes, Hana said. The same terms you presented in the first session. Yes. Votan stared at her. You have destroyed my fleet. You have captured my warlord. You have demonstrated a weapon that can erase ships from existence. And you are offering me the same terms? Mutual borders? Non-aggression? Trade? Yes. Why? The word came out rough, almost broken. Why have you not added reparations, territory, demands for tribute? Why have you not asked for the subjugation of the Dominion? You have the power to take everything. Hana looked at him. She did not blink. She did not smile. She spoke in the same measured voice she had used from the very beginning. Because these terms were always fair. We did not come here to conquer you. We came here to be respected. You simply needed to understand that respect was not optional. Votan sat very still. His clawed hands rested on the table. And for the first time, they were not posed in dominance or dismissal. They were just hands. Tired hands. He looked at the datapad again. He looked at the fleet outside the window. He looked at the black tortoise, hanging in the dark like a judgment. Then he picked up the stylus and signed. The silence in the room after the signing was deeper than space. No laughter, no war hymns, no mockery, just the soft click of the stylus touching the screen and the quiet hum of the station spinning around its dead star. Hana took the datapad back, checked the signature, and nodded once. Thank you, Grand Ruler. The Terran United Council looks forward to a peaceful future between our peoples. She stood, bowed her head slightly the same way she had at the start of every session, and walked out. The aftermath unfolded quickly. The full recordings of all 3 original negotiation sessions, unedited and complete, were released on the Galactic Network alongside the battle footage. Every species in every system watched the same story from beginning to end. They saw the small human woman bow and present fair terms. They saw the laughter. They saw her come back and try again. They saw more laughter. They saw her come back a third time, and they heard her final words about peace being refused. Then they saw what happened next. The footage of the black tortoise firing its main weapon was watched more than any other recording in the history of the Galactic Network. Species that had built their understanding of power around size and aggression watched 26 warships fold into nothing and disappear. They watched it once, twice, 10 times, and each time the meaning became clearer. The humans had built something that could end fleets in a single shot, and they had offered peace first. Warlord Cressa was returned to the Dominion as part of the agreement. She never spoke publicly about the battle. Those who knew her said she had changed. The scars she once wore with pride now seemed to weigh on her differently. She retired from military service within a year. Envoy Dulles, the low-ranking diplomat who had tried to warn his people, was quietly promoted. He became the Dreth Dominion's first official ambassador to Earth. He arrived on a human transport ship, stepped onto the ground of a planet covered in green and blue and gold, and was greeted by a delegation that bowed their heads slightly and offered him tea. He accepted with hands that trembled, and he spent his first evening on Earth sitting in a garden, listening to birds he had no name for, wondering how a species this gentle had built something like the black tortoise. Admiral Quan Tejo returned to Earth without ceremony. He gave no speeches. He attended no celebrations. When a journalist caught him outside the naval headquarters and asked how he felt about the battle, he stopped walking, thought for a moment, and said, "I would have preferred the negotiation to work." Then he kept walking. Park Jinu, the weapons analyst who had calibrated the hammer, deleted the test data from his personal files the day he returned home. He went back to his small apartment, made himself a cup of coffee, and sat by the window, looking out at the city. The buildings were full of people who would never know how close the Hainam colony had come to destruction, and who would never know the name of the weapon that had saved it. Jinu preferred it that way. He took off his glasses, cleaned them slowly, and hoped, quietly and deeply, that the hammer would never fire again. And Yoon Hana. The Terran Council held a private meeting to discuss the outcome. They called it a success, a word Hana accepted with a nod, but did not celebrate. One of the council members asked her the question that everyone wanted answered. Negotiator Yoon, do you consider this mission a success? Hana thought about it. She thought about the chamber, and the laughter, and the way Votan had looked at her like she was nothing. She thought about Bora tapping her fingers on the console. She thought about Doyen's thin smile. She thought about Dulles standing at the airlock, asking if there was still time. We gave them every chance, she said. That matters. Not because it changed the outcome, but because it proved who we are. The council was quiet for a moment. Then they moved on to the next item on the agenda. In the weeks and months that followed, something changed across the galaxy. Diplomatic envoys began arriving at Earth. Not a flood, but a steady, growing stream. Species that had ignored humanity for decades, species that had considered humans too young and too small to matter, began sending representatives. They came with proposals and questions and offers of friendship. They did not come because they were afraid. They came because they had watched the recordings. All of them. From the first bow to the last signature. And they had seen something they did not expect from a species so young. They had seen strength that did not need to shout. Mercy that did not come from weakness. And a people who had chosen, when they had every reason and every power to destroy their enemy, to offer the same fair terms they had offered from the start. The galaxy had learned many things about many species over the millennia. But the lesson humanity taught was the one that stayed. They do not raise their voice before they raise their weapons. And when they raise their weapons, they only need to do it once.